Hi, everyone. My name is Shishir Mehrotra. I am the CEO and founder of Coda. And today we're going to talk about rituals of great teams and look in particular at some of the practices of amazing teams and leaders and talk about how you can adopt their techniques or hone your own rituals as well. The context for this talk starts with a quote from a friend of mine, Bing Gordon. Bing, some of you may know him as one of the early founders of Electronic Arts. And he's now a famous investor, sits on the boards of companies like Amazon and Zynga. I had the pleasure of sitting on a board with Bing myself, and he regularly used this line that I thought was really thought-provoking. He said that great companies have a small list of golden rituals, and there are three criteria. Number one, they're named. Number two, every employee knows them by their first Friday. And number three, they are templated. Now, Bing would use all sorts of examples for golden rituals. He would talk about examples like Amazon having 6-pagers, Google has OKRs, Salesforce has V2MOM. As he talked more and more about it, I started recognizing this pattern everywhere I looked. I looked at my own company, Coda. And Coda, for those of you that aren't familiar, is a new type of all-in-one doc. It blends the best parts of documents, spreadsheets, presentations, and applications into a new surface. We started the company back in 2014 and launched the product 3 years ago, and it's now used by over 50,000 teams around the world. If you were to take Bing's test and apply it to Coda as a company, you would find our golden ritual here. So if you took a group of Coda employees on their first Friday and asked them for Coda's golden ritual, they would almost surely tell you about something we do called Dory Pulse. Dory Pulse is the way that we run meetings at Coda. So instead of asking questions in meetings, we add them to a table. We call that a dory, and everybody upvotes and downvotes the questions. The dory name comes from the fish from Finding Nemo who asks all the questions. We also do a thing called Pulse. So when we're ready to make a decision on a topic, we'll ask everybody to add their feedback into a table, and we check a little box that hides everyone else's responses until everyone's done to try to avoid that groupthink. So you get a group of Coda employees together on the first Friday, ask them for Coda's golden ritual, they'll tell you Dory and Pulse for a few reasons. First off, they've probably seen it 30 or 40 times in that first week. It'd be very odd to come into a meeting at Coda and not have Dory and Pulse as part of the meeting. But most new Coda employees aren't really meeting wonks. In fact, the way that they think about Dory and Pulse isn't really about why it's a more efficient process or a faster process. They think about it as indicative of culture. They'll often brag to their friends and colleagues and say, I joined this new company, but they do this amazing thing called Dory Pulse. And I had a question that outvoted the CEO's question one week. And I got asked to submit my opinion on a decision that I normally would have been excluded from, but it was brought into the discussion through a thing called Pulse. So as I reflected on Bing's idea of golden rituals and Coda's golden rituals, I started realizing that rituals are a really powerful concept. They're not just a way to run your team more efficiently, not just your team's operating system. They actually happen to be that two-way mirror into your culture. And when your employees talk about your culture, or when observers talk about your culture, they often talk about them in terms of rituals, and the two end up being synonymous with each other. So I got really excited about this idea late last year, and I decided to turn it into a personal project. I started interviewing friends and colleagues around the industry, and I ended up broadening wider and wider and wider until I talked to over 1,000 different teams, leaders, entrepreneurs, authors from all sorts of different companies, from companies like the leaders of Disney and Nike to many different startups and book authors. Each of them had their own version of these stories to tell. They would talk about their golden rituals, they would talk about how they evolved, and they would most importantly talk about what it meant for their company. A number of them would tell me things like, as a company, we produce one product for our customers, and we produce another product for our employees. We sometimes refer to that as culture, and it's embodied in these golden rituals. I got really excited about this idea and decided to turn it into a book. So I'm writing a book now called Rituals of Great Teams. We'll talk a little bit more about it later and give you actually a chance for a sneak peek. But for today's talk, what I thought I would do is pick out 5 stories of amazing rituals from great teams. Hopefully from each of these stories, you can learn a little bit from those specific rituals And more importantly, think about and reflect on your own golden rituals and what you want your intentional culture and rituals to be. All right, let's get started with our first ritual. This one is from Ariana Huffington, who is the founder of Thrive Global and also the author of many great books that many of you have probably read about all sorts of different topics. This is about a technique and a ritual she called resets, which is all about building connection through mindfulness. So maybe as context on Ariana's journey, this started with an accident that she had in 2007, where she went through a pretty deep reflection period, learning about herself. She started realizing that this accident was caused by burnout. And it caused her to study what causes burnout and how to think about it, not only for herself, but how it impacts the world around her. She ended up developing a set of techniques out of this that are the basis of her new company, Thrive Global, and also are great rituals for her own team. So her primary ritual is called reset. And let me just show you what she means. Let me just turn the volume down to tell you a little bit more about this process. So this reset is a 60-second breathing exercise that's personalized to each person. So what Ariana did here is this is a video of all these pictures and quotes and videos from her life. These are pictures of her kids, videos of her hometown in Greece, quotes from people she loves, and all of it is built around this breathing exercise. It gives us a moment of reflection and peace, and it turns out that 60 seconds is enough time to really reset how our brain chemistry is operating at that moment. So Ariana got really excited about this idea, not only to be used individually, but also as a ritual for her teams. So at Thrive, they actually start every meeting this way. So what they'll do is at the start of each meeting, they'll press a button, they call it spin the wheel, and they'll pick a random person in the group and they'll play their reset. And for 60 seconds, everybody will collectively go through that breathing and meditative exercise. This has two benefits for the team. One, everybody recenters their brain chemistry, gets into that proper problem-solving mood that is indicative of how she wants Thrive employees to operate. But second, everybody gets to learn a little bit about each other. Some people's resets are deeply personal and all about their family. Others are about their interests and about places they've been. Some people pick really calm music. Some people pick very pop music or rock music. But everything is a way to not only get better centered, but to learn a bit about each other. I thought this was a really interesting ritual and one that reflects a lot of different aspects of Ariana's ethos, and obviously it reflects the culture of Thrive. But as you think about your rituals of your teams, one of the lessons I would take away from this is that rituals can be about more efficient work, but it also can be a way to create an environment that really helps drive connection between people. And I think Ariana's example is a really interesting one to think about. All right, let's go to number 2. The second ritual here is from Adam Nash, and it's called the 3-bucket approach to planning. And I like to say it's about not comparing apples to oranges to pears. So Adam, for people that aren't familiar, is currently the CEO and co-founder of a new company called Daffy. And before this, he used to run product at Dropbox, and he was a CEO at Wealthfront. So here's a quote from Adam. He said, "Most teams fall into the trap of trying to find a single formula to rank all of their product ideas. Unfortunately, this pits features that move metrics, like engagement and revenue, against customer requests and delight features. Over time, teams that do this inevitably focus exclusively on metrics, and their relationship with their customers suffers." I thought this was a really astute observation of how teams tend to operate, because every team that's trying to figure out where to head next for their customers is inevitably comparing lots of different ways to go after it. He ended up dividing up all the different ways that that a company can make progress into 3 buckets. And he changed the way that his teams think about planning. He says the 3 buckets are metrics movers, things that move. Those are sort of the bread and butter of how you move the core metrics of the business. Second is customer requests. Many times these won't actually move a metric, but they create that responsiveness to the customer that really super serves the customers you have. And then third is delight. These are the surprises, the things nobody asked for, the things that may or may not move a metric, but are really the things that form the heart and soul of a product. Now, the ritual that Adam formed around this was very specific. He basically codified this into their planning process. So Adam is a big Jira user, which I'm guessing many of the people in this audience are as well. And so his teams tend to track all of the different ideas and efforts in Jira. And he ended up doing a very simple thing with that is he took people's Jira's issues. In this case, he did it in a Coda doc. He synced those into the doc and he added a column for bucket. And he asked the team to go through each one of them. And first off, just label each one as, is this a delight, metric, or customer request? Then they separately go through each one. So you take that list and you filter down just to the metric movers. And for this set, you want to figure out and compare them based on which will move the most important metrics the fastest. And so you go through each one, you figure out which metric it's moving, and then you compare them. Separately, you go and say, what are our customer requests? For customer requests, you want to focus on which ones are the most frequent, which ones are the customers the loudest, which ones are the most important customers, but a slightly different set of considerations than you have for the metric movers. Finally, for delight, they come to a page that has just the Jira items that they selected for delight. And here, they just let themselves be inspired. And Adam's technique of doing it is asking people to put in a picture of what the delightful experience is here, and just letting people use their own intuition to decide what should happen here. In this way, he's able to split out 3 different parts of the process and give people a better way to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. Now, the specific ritual might apply to a lot of you, but I think the real lesson I took away from this is how many rituals are really just about common language. In this case, defining these 3 big buckets allows the team to make sure they're using similar language when they're making hard decisions. And I think a common language like this can often clarify decision-making and planning in a very impactful way for companies. That's ritual number 2. Let's jump ahead to ritual number 3. This is from Jenny Emick. She's a design lead at Square. And this ritual is about how she changed one-on-one meetings, in particular as a technique for helping people take charge of their careers. So Jenny gave me this quote. She said, designers weren't having regular conversations around career development with their managers outside of review cycles. While people had standing one-on-ones with their manager, we lacked structure that prioritized career development conversations on a regular basis. This is a really interesting observation and a very common one, right? Is that employees feel like that hard career conversation happens at this intense moment when we're finding out whether you get promoted or not. It's a really tough time to have that conversation. And she noticed that everybody had these one-on-ones where they had lots of conversations with bosses, but they didn't really talk about careers. And more importantly, the way they did it was often in this flowing technique that Jenny liked to call the forever scroll Google Doc. Almost every one of these one-on-ones had a 60-page Google Doc that was date, notes, date, notes, date, notes. So Jenny took this and shifted it to a slightly different model and split it out into pages. So in this case, this is the Coda representation of what she did, where she creates a one-on-one doc per employee, and each one has a set of separate pages. So in Coda, pages show up on the left-hand side. They're kind of like tabs in a spreadsheet turned sideways. I have no idea why spreadsheets have a monopoly on tabs. We thought that was silly. But in this case, each one-on-one doc gets structured in a specific way. Each one of them starts with something she calls a partnership agreement, where the employee and the manager write down some of their expectations for each other and some of the behaviors that they should know about each other. There's a separate area for tracking goals, which might be the immediate things you're working on, and also a place for tracking development. That's the Career Path Center. That's where you write down, here's where I think I want to head, and here's some of the longer term things I should be doing for it. They also do something fun at Square they call Kudos, which is all about recording the important things that happen throughout the year so that you don't have recency bias when you get to promotion time. And then finally, she has an organized place for the meeting notes. It's a really fun ritual. It spread like wildfire through Square. And actually, we looked at our logs, and there's now over 100 teams and companies that are using her technique to manage one-on-ones in their workplace. But I think the ritual here is somewhat interesting. In fact, it's almost a micro ritual, because the heart of what she did was she actually asked every manager-employee pair to design their own ritual, their own way of forming their partnership and having the right engagement for what that employee and that manager wish. And so I think this idea of defining rituals doesn't always have to be at the company level or even at the team level. It might be even down to very specific partnerships. All right, let's move to number 4. This is from Des Trainer, his 4-step prioritized productivity guide. It's all about taking control of your time. So Des is the co-founder of Intercom, which is a big B2B SaaS company that helps manage customer service for companies, including Coda, and many others. Des also happens to be a prolific writer, and he's really good on Twitter. And he had this tweet a couple years ago now that I thought was really insightful. He said, thinking about productivity and tools, your email is what others think you should work on. Your to-do list is what you think you should work on. And your calendar is usually what you actually work on. How much do they overlap in your world? And he went and drew these little Venn diagrams to show what those overlaps might be in an ideal case and a less than ideal case. Whenever I show this tweet to busy people, they always smile because it's so reflective of what each of us face as we wrestle between what we think we should be doing, what others think we should be doing, and what we're actually doing. So Des took this and turned it into a personal ritual. So in this case, what he did was he set up a document that has 3 steps of pre-work. First, you set up a to-do list. Second, you find a way to track your time. In this case, what he did was sync in his calendar. He did this in Coda, and he used our packs, which is a way to synchronize data from different systems into a Coda doc. And so every time there's an event on his calendar, it'll show up as a row in this table. And then he synced in his email. And he did something in particular where he said, every time I star a message in Gmail, I'm going to use that as my signal. So when he stars messages in Gmail, they show up in this list, 1 row per thread. So those are the 3 pieces of pre-work. And then every week you take that basis and you do 4 steps. First, you clear your inbox. So you take everything you starred and you either add it to your to-do list or you link it to something already on your to-do list. Then you take everything that's now on your to-do list and you make sure it's on your calendar. And so you go through and make sure each one is linked to an existing event or link it to a new event. Finally, you run your week where your to-do list now has 2 new columns. When am I going to work on this and where did it come from? And then finally, at the end of your week, you get a chart. And this chart says what percentage of your time had linked to-dos versus didn't. And it gives you a little score, a numerical score of how aligned your time was. So you could think about that as a numerical score of that Venn diagram that he started with his tweet. I love this technique for a number of different reasons. I switched over to using this model almost 2 years ago now, and I have now almost 100 weeks of data on how well I've done on this. The one thing I learned is that for me, this number is very indicative of my sense of progress through the week. I think about it as my barometer of success for the week. I've also learned that any week where I cross 50% is a pretty good week for me, which was a pretty humbling observation that I only have control over about 50% of my time. But I think the bigger lesson that I took away from this is when we think about personal productivity, we should recognize that your team's productivity is upper bounded by your own personal productivity. And one of the reasons techniques like this are so important is I'm sure you've all seen this happen where you fall behind, and because of that, your peers fall behind, your team falls behind, and everybody falls behind. So taking control of your time is not only a thing that's important to do for yourself and for your own ability to make progress and feel good about what you're doing, it also greatly impacts the team around you. Okay, ritual number 5 is one of my own. This is called Eigen Questions, and it comes from my time at YouTube. You can think about this as the art of framing problems. Before starting Coda, I spent about 6 years at YouTube. I ran the YouTube products through the period about 2008 to 2014. And I'll tell a little story about what happened when I started. So when I joined in 2008, we had many different questions facing YouTube. There was, YouTube was not an obvious business at the time. In fact, a lot of people thought about it as Google's first failed acquisition. We had lawsuits, we had issues with scaling our networks, we had many different things facing us, but it might surprise you to hear that one of the hardest questions we kept asking ourselves was this question we called the modern family question. The question was pretty simple. If you looked at our search logs every week, one of the top 10 queries every week was for Modern Family. And back in 2008, Modern Family was the most popular show on television. We had one big problem though. We didn't have Modern Family on YouTube. So our responses to this search query were not particularly good. So there was a debate about what to do about it. And it turned out that abc.com had decided to post every episode of Modern Family for free on their website. Now, that might not seem like a big deal nowadays, but in 2008, that was kind of unheard of. The #1 show on TV available for free on the web. And so the YouTube team basically divided in half. And you could probably picture what the factions felt like. About half the company decided that we should do the right thing and link out to abc.com whenever somebody searched for Modern Family. After all, we're owned by Google, the world's second largest search engine. We should probably just help people get to the right answer. That's what Google would do. The other half of the company, mostly the content partnerships team, the marketing team, and so on, said that would be a really terrible idea. If we linked out to all these other places, then none of this content will ever live on YouTube and will forever be a place for the content that doesn't deserve to live elsewhere. And that didn't seem like a great future. So this question, with many other things facing us, was the #1 question in our staff meetings for literally months. And we couldn't quite figure out what to do about it. So we decided to hold an all-day meeting just to answer this question. Took the team, the executive team off to an offsite location and said, what are we going to do with the Modern Family question? And I got assigned the task of figuring out how to frame this problem. So the night before we go on this trip, I sit and think about how are we going to talk about this topic that seems like it's been debated to death and everybody has already formed their opinion on where it should land. How are we going to really make a call on this? I happened to read that evening, about a dilemma that another team was facing, the Google shopping team. The Google shopping the shopping team at Google was building a search engine for shopping where you could go find products from all over the internet. They had a problem. They were getting their butts kicked by a company called Amazon. And they were really conflicted about why that was happening. Because the common wisdom said that users should obviously pick Google. And after all, if you came to Google and searched for products, you found not only everything that Amazon had, but everything across the entire internet. So they asked themselves, why would anybody choose to search Amazon instead of starting with Google? And when they would ask users would regularly come back with the phrase, we would prefer consistent over comprehensive. And they would say things like, I really trust Amazon and I go there first because I find the reviews are consistent. I find that the pricing is consistent. I find that I understand how the shipping process is going to work, how the returns are going to work. And all of that leads to a feeling that I know it's a smaller catalog, but I'd rather have a more consistent experience than a comprehensive one. So when we started this discussion for our YouTube offsite, I decided to start with this question instead. And I said, instead of focusing on should we link out or not, why don't we focus on a discussion of which way is the video market going to head? Is it going to be more about consistency or is it going to be more about comprehensiveness? Now on this issue, you could have a real debate and reasonable people could come to different conclusions on which of these is more likely to happen. After a long discussion, we came to a pretty unanimous view that the video market is much more likely to be about consistency than about comprehensiveness. Now, remember, this was back in 2008, about 14 years ago, and I think that we were mostly right. If you look at the amazing progress that's been made in the video market, there's so many great outlets for video, of which none of them are comprehensive. Based on this decision, we decided that we're not going to link out to abc.com, and YouTube still doesn't do that. But it also happened that this decision led to many other decisions. We, for example, decided not to allow embedded players on YouTube. Or probably one of the most famous examples is that we decided to take back control of the YouTube app for the iPhone. At the time, the iOS app was actually built by the team at Apple. You might remember that when the iPhone came out, there was no app store. So Apple had to build all the different apps, and they hadn't stopped. But they weren't really able to keep up with YouTube, and almost a third of the YouTube catalog didn't play back. So I went down to Apple and I gently told the management team, I would like to take back control of the YouTube app. And they kind of laughed and said, I don't understand why you do that. You're going to give up default distribution on the biggest mobile operating system. You're going to have to start from 0 users. Why would you do that? And I said, the choice is actually kind of easy. We've decided that we would rather have a consistent experience, even if it's for less users, than a comprehensive experience for many, many, many more users, but is an inconsistent view of what YouTube is. This concept and way of reframing problems is something we now call Eigen Questions. Eigen question is a play on a mathematical term called Eigenvectors. And the math doesn't really matter that much, but if you're curious, Eigenvectors are a term used in linear algebra. In a multidimensional space, an eigenvector is the most discriminating vector of the space, the one that best describes that multidimensional space. It's basically the same concept that gets used in machine learning as well. But that math doesn't really matter. The better definition here is an eigenquestion is a question where, if answered, it likely answers the subsequent questions as well. And teams that I work with, we spend a lot of time on trying to find the right eigenquestion. We've developed a set of rituals to help us do it. One on the left here, we developed a way to think about whiteboarding exercises this way. And you can go read a little bit about how we did it in our Eigenquestions write-up. But for example, we have specific pen colors we use for different parts of the Eigenquestion process. We also do an exercise in Coda where we just list the questions and, in whatever order that might be, and we just spend time not trying to answer the questions, but asking ourselves, which of these questions should we answer first? And more often than not, the question we should answer first isn't the first one on the list, it's the sixth one on the list. But if we answer that one correctly, it's going to help us answer all the rest of them. I think this ritual has helped us with many different problems. But I think the core idea is that before focusing on finding the right answer, we focus on finding the right question. Okay, so those are 5 examples of rituals of great teams. We learned about how Arianna Huffington helped use resets to move from being all about the work to being all about the team. We learned how Adam Nash used the idea of 3 buckets of product planning as a great example of setting up common language to clarify decision-making. Jenny Emick from Square taught us how to use a simple twist on a ritual that many of us do multiple times a week, a one-on-one, and to take that ritual and turn it into a specific way for each partnership to develop their own rituals, in this case, to take charge of their career. Des Traynor from Intercom taught us about how to use a ritual to increase your own personal productivity and take control of your own time as a way to then help your teams be more productive as well. And finally, from the YouTube story on Eigen Questions, we learned about the power of asking the right question, not just getting to the right answer. So hopefully you've enjoyed learning from some of these different rituals, but the important part is not just picking off from other people's rituals, but really looking at your own. So I'll ask each of you to run Bing's test. Take a group of employees, likely on the first Friday, and ask them what your golden rituals are and see what they say. Think about some of the other pieces here. Are they named? Are they templated? Are there things that are really reflective of what you want your culture to be about? I find that just starting from that point, you can then explore and understand which rituals you have that you really like and want to emphasize more, and which ones perhaps you want to adapt to the culture you really want your company to have. One last call for you is, as I mentioned at the start of this talk, I'm actually writing a book on this topic. It's called Rituals of Great Teams. And the promise is that it is a catalog of the 100 best rituals that I've collected from great teams and leaders. It includes many other rituals, including the 5 that I just went through. And I decided to write the book in the open. And so I'm allowing people to come in and help contribute to the book as I do it, give feedback on other people's rituals, or perhaps add your own ideas as well. So the link here will allow you to go join that brain trust and help write this book, or help contribute, write this book, or just learn from it as well. So coda.io/@Shishir/join the Rituals of Great Teams Brain Trust. We'll find the sign up form for this. Hopefully you've learned a little bit about rituals of great teams and come away as inspired as I have on forming, learning, and shaping these rituals for all the great teams around us. Thank you very much.